point. Well, there's some rabbit holes in this lake.
I tried really hard to get rid of them.
Oh, there's remnants
Just
of them.
to let you know, the down arrow on this is next instead of up.
Okay,
It's in reverse.
okay,
And then there's a pointer on there too.
okay.
All right, hello everyone. Thanks for coming to the archives. If you haven't been here before, welcome. Oh no, go. And thanks for coming again if you've been here before, obviously. A lot of you. Today we have Elizabeth Tritthart with us, and she will be talking about the Millineries of Butte and their impact. She will be exploring the rich history of the millinery trade here in Butte. And did you know that Butte was considered a fashion hub in its early days? I did not. One might think that only the people who purchased fashion items were those living in the homes of the Copper Kings, but nothing could be further from the truth. From the very founding of Butte, our merchants were scouring the world for the finest designer goods to bring to Butte. This presentation is a result of the research done to prepare a collection of historic hats from the collections of the World Museum of Mining and local millinery collectors to be shown in the Hats Off Millinery Fashion Show held here at the Phoenix Block on November 8th. A fashion show is focused on the hats themselves, but today Elizabeth wants to focus on people, families, and their remarkable achievements that helped make what it is today. Thank you for coming to speak, and go ahead.
Good day. Yay, yay. I will say I was absolutely frightened when I got here and found out there was no parking spots. So I took a risk and parked elsewhere, and if I get in trouble, you're worth it. So I wanted to start out and introduce a few people in the room, because this whole presentation, this whole event is a teamwork effort. And we are very correct in saying that today I'm showing the research that's going underneath the show and the groups that are working together to present the show. So it's not just me, and it's just not my brilliant ideas. It's a whole team of us. Jeanette from the World Mining Museum. Dale Deco, a collector. Brian from Rediscoveries. I'm here representing the IBRC and the Phoenix Arts Alliance. So we have a broad group, plus we have Tyler from the archives, who's part and parcel of what's going on here. So, Hats Off to Butte is a celebration of hats and millinery as an event, and we're actually doing something different. It's an extended educational opportunity to teach new skills, present history, invite the community to participate, so that we will actually end this in November with a fashion show and a month-long exhibit in the IBRC Foreground Gallery. So this has been ongoing. We started planning this in January or so, and we've been meeting weekly, so we've had a lot of ideas of how to go about it. But it's to get a broad perspective. And the idea here is, when we're trying to culturally bring community back into understanding the history of where it began and where we are going, it's important to get a wide group of people to work together. So this presentation is a result of the research done to prepare a collection of historic hats from the World Museum of Mining and the local collectors to be shown in the Hats Off to Butte show being held in the Phoenix Block building on November the 8th. And that's in the afternoon on a Saturday afternoon. Think, light foods and lots of fun and good music. Now, this fashion show is going to have the hats, but the combination that we're planning are 30 out of the collections and 30 new ones out of the community. So we're looking to be able to say that we're featuring the history and reinserting the new skills. It turns out that Butte, Montana was a fashionable place, and part of that was we were all transplants from other places coming here, and some of our transplants who were helping us get the mining industry up and running had homes in places like New York and Philadelphia, San Francisco, London, all over the world. And because we started with all of the people from all over the world, we have a unique place inside of history and fashion because our people knew how to market themselves. The purpose of my work is to help document the collection, raise public awareness of this collection and the importance of preserving it alongside of the mining equipment while telling the story of Butte's history through workshops, educational opportunities, and to reinsert traditional millinery community information that was once practiced and as part of our integral culture. So the goals of my research was to document the sessions. So we had some work sessions inside the museum to be able to discover the hats that the museum already has in its collection. And we specifically concentrated on some of the hats that were made or sold here in Butte that we could physically identify. And as you can see on this table, we also have a number of hat boxes that we have found from our milliners. The hats were examined. Some are being freshened up and brought here today, so you see some, and there's a wide collection here. So when we talk about millinery, traditionally you would have two words to describe hats. Millinery is usually the female hat. Haberdashery more includes the men's hats. And so people wouldn't recognize haberdashery nowadays. It's a long word, and they don't realize that it's gender specific. So we went with millinery. And the results of the research has allowed me to make resources available, get the resources available through the archives. It's been very interesting to go through what's in the museum, what's in the archives, what can I find out on the internet, and you guys are already coming up to me today and telling me that you are the descendants of some of my milliners. And so the answer is, if you happen to be one of those, please make sure you give me contact information because I would like to be able to include you in some of the information I'm gathering. Now, in the short time of a brown bag, I could tell you, I can't tell you everything I've been through. Jeanette said, I do a whole bunch of rabbit trails. They keep me up at night. The theme of our fashion show this year, and we're saying this year because we're looking at building this into being an event that happens over multiple years to keep the history alive, to talk about a lot of different things that we find. So the first theme that we're going to be doing is through the decades. And what did I choose as the decades? 1880 to 1980, which is 100 years of fashion. Copper mining was the primary occupation of Butte during this time. Newspapers, land records, photographs are all available from this period, so there's a wealth of area to do my research from. And economic and census records are digitally available, which makes my life a whole lot easier. Sit in my bunny slippers. One of the things that I needed to research was copper production and trying to figure out what kind of number that I was going to use, where was this data. In 1864, we had gold discovered, but it was exhausted by 1867. In 1870, we had started silver production, and in 1881 is when we began copper production. And in beginning the copper production and beginning our timeline at 1880 is a safe thing to do to say that we can keep track of when copper started, and we were walking alongside of that. In 1980, ARCO closed the smelter operation. In 83, it suspended all mining activity. In 85, there was a purchase by Mining Resources of the Anaconda mining claims. In 86, it began mining again. So that break is a natural place for us to consider taking our number set, our data set from. So these numbers come out of the US Geological Survey reports, and one common statistic was the thousands of pounds of ore delivered to the smelter. That is the only thing that I saw as a statistic that was going through, completely through 1980 without super change. After 1980, the data was not being reported by the state. Now this is the state number, meaning the state of Montana. And since copper is our primary thing here, the numbers are pretty representative of what was happening in the Butte area. Butte itself did not report these numbers independently. They reported them by state. So my next little graph, if it goes, will it go? There we go, are the Butte people. Must have a population. And so looking at this, these numbers are based on the census data, and I use the numbers for the city of Butte itself. What I found in the data is that the numbers were actually being reported within the city and within the county until we then kind of consolidated. So I had to use what was available to me, and I went off of the city. The idea of doing this is I wanted to look at the relationship of these two graphs. One would think that our population would have been higher during our highest production years, and one gets surprised by the idea that the people didn't leave once they came here. They didn't just continue to follow the mining into another part of the country. They came here, they settled here, they created families here. So then there was another thing that I needed to explore to start thinking about this process. It was the impact of some of the major events. Now, it's really hard that that's not a numbers type thing, but I'll give you the idea that there's 6 major events, and I just kind of scaled their timing. From 1895, you have mine consolidation. You also had the Kenyon Canal warehouse explosion. In 1889, you had the fire with 25 buildings burned on the Bose block. 1905, you had the fire on September 20th with 62 buildings lost in Uptown on Park Street. 1908, you had the flooding of the Silver Bow Creek and the 1914 labor riot. So all of these things are being grouped by decade. 1917, you have Granite Mountain, specular fire, and the miner strike. 1922, you had the Anaconda Road massacre in 1920, and 1922, the mines closed for 9 months. So there is a graphing of the major events. 1955, we get the Berkeley pit opened, and 1959 through 1960 was the Anaconda strike of 181 days. So you can see that these events and the people and the production really didn't change the population in Butte. My statement that I had just made, that once we came, we pretty much stayed. And that's what we see today. Now, the next exploration here is the millinery businesses themselves. And I got this data primarily from the Polk City directory, which is available in the archives. And I was able to identify data to determine if the millinery shop was a retail establishment that just sold goods, or a milliner who primarily sold hats. The retail stores did have millinery shops. They did employ milliners, but they weren't independent milliners. They were working for a lead buyer. On the independent side were the onesies and twosies. The millinery businesses were affected by the events in 1905 and by the consolidation of the large retailers as we grew. So you could see that over time, the individuals dropped out and they more wound up working for the retailers. Some of the early millinery businesses. We had Kahnweiler's Bazaar of Fashion. We had Schilling Brothers, who advertised in the newspaper, but they didn't use any graphics. The New York Tailor Shop did the same thing. In this era of the earliest advertisement in the newspapers, there was a tradition of not using the cuts and not using art, but placing the ad inside the text on a page of a newspaper. It was a really interesting presentation. We had E.L. Bonner and Company, K.C. and Brophy, Goldsmith and Co., H. Jacobs and Sons, and we had Sands and Boyle. Down on below, we have at least 8 listings of milliners who were in the Polk directory. None of them pulled an ad, a big ad, and put it in the newspaper. They were all advertising on the local business page, just like most people starting out. Now, the millinery district. Like any good district, any good historic map, you gotta know where it's supposed to be in the city. Our millinery district were the addresses that were under 200 on the streets of Quartz, Granite, Broadway, Park, Maine, and Wyoming. And the largest concentrations were on Park Street and Broadway. So in a given day, a lady could visit all of these sites, pick from the fashions, and then place their order. One of our primary designers that is well known as a milliner is Elizabeth Haggerty. And she has a very unique story coming here. We have heard of her as being a single woman. She was in business an incredibly long time. She went from being part of a retail operation to ultimately owning her shop over Weinberg's. So she entered the United States at the age of 26 in the US in Detroit, Michigan. Her nearest relatives are in Canada, and her mother was Ellen Haggerty in Eganville. So this is the Ontario area, and she had come down. She paid for her own passage. She had $50 in her possession. Her stated destination was a Leonard Hotel in Butte, and she is supposed to meet her sister, Mary Haggerty, who conveniently happens to be going on a buying trip to find her in New York. She had listed a previous visit to the US in 1915, and she worked for the designer Tappe in New York City for a year. And that gave her enough to say that she was a milliner, but she came back to work for her sister, who was already established here. She had returned home to get her possessions and then traveled to the US. Her entry was recorded on the Canadian Pacific Railway. She entered on a train. And her sister, Mary Haggerty, I found records of her being a witness to a wedding in 1912, but by 1915, she is found to be the head of millinery at Connell's and eventually married to Dan Coleman of Hennessy's in 1923. So this is very important. Mary is listed as living at 304 West Court Street, and she's staying with her uncle, who turns out to be Patrick De Lowry, and his wife Alice, their son Michael, with her brother Michael Haggerty. So Elizabeth did not come, quote, alone. She came and met family that had already been here and had started. In the 1910 census, I can find Patrick DeLowry as being a house carpenter, and he had immigrated in 1890. Alice was there, and his wife, and she had also immigrated in 1890. Michael DeLowry was less than a year, and he was born in Montana. Mary had immigrated in 1905. Michael Haggerty, the nephew who was a miner, similar name, had come in 1901. So the whole family around this started with mining, but was supported then by the merchants and the milliners. And it provided a place for them to get started, get a little bit to get going. Now, the data tells us that Patrick DeLowry, who's Ellen Haggerty's brother, immigrated first, and he is honored as a pioneer of Butte. As the census indicated, the 409 West Courts property was owned with no mortgage. I did some research on that lot on Court Street. It still stands. Michael Haggerty was granted citizenship in 1920 after serving in the war. He lived in Anaconda, and he started the Montana Collection Agency, another business that would be kind of related. He worked in the Connell Clerical Department in 1916. He first appeared on the scene here in Butte in 1899 as visiting friends in Butte, and the paper was the Rocky Mountain Celt. There's a birth record there in 1903 for a 10-pound son credited to him as well. Mrs. Ellen Haggerty, Elizabeth's mother, immigrated in 1916, 3 years after the death of her husband, Edward. Eleanor Haggerty married Jeremiah Edward Coyne, who was also recorded as visiting in Butte in 1912, and records show it followed with an immigration in 1918. So we're establishing a pattern that the families had people come visit that followed shortly thereafter with them deciding to transplant and stay here. Elizabeth had connection to Weinberg's. And so this Weinberg's was set up by Joseph and Harry Weinberg and Joseph Epstein. In 1899, we had their first newspaper ad, and they had misspelled Epstein as Epstein. They were going out of business in 1902, and it was because that the partnership with Epstein fell apart. These are some of the ads that the company had. Another company is Simons. And Simons represents a totally different kind of family picture. In Simons, we have, and the main characters in this story is a William S. Simons, a Hattie Simons, a George L. Simons, Mr. and Mrs. Jack Cohen, a Clara Simons, and the Oppenheimer family. And I'll get to this in a little bit. This is a lot deeper than people would think. We think of Simons as just being like the store. So to find William S. Simons, in 1882, there was a letter being left for him at the post office. That gives me a good indication that he was there that early. The newspaper in 1885 lists William Simons as attending a Highland Club dance. So from the day the Simons launched, they were on the society pages. A lot of their life is visible. September of 1899, he married. He married a lady named Hattie Rothenberg. And so this was another important family member, and she was born in Hamilton, Ohio. So, okay. George L. Simons, who was also another founding member of the company, was born in Watertown, New York, November 11th, 1800, and he married Jeanette Oppenheimer in 1898. These associations and these marriages were considered carefully. So a pair of the partners married a pair of sisters opposite in the family. And that helped establish them. So George Simons and J.E. Oppenheimer married sisters Phoebe and Jeanette. George Simons and their parent, I'm going to go there for a moment, their parent is Cyrus Simons. He was born in 1844. He had married an Elizabeth Ann Tritthart in 1911. He died in 1926, and he did spend some time here in Butte. These pictures are pictures of the interior of the Simons store, and this was I think this is the opening of the big store that we see today, the Phoenix Block building, in I'll get me in a moment. Okay, so this is from the inside here, but what's important about this picture is the founding members all have their photographs on that page. So we at least have some physical representation of them. Next to it on the right-hand side is the article about the 1905 fire that got us naming this building the Phoenix Block building, the fact that it rose from the ashes very, very quickly. And that is an important marvel of what's going on here, because the families, while we might think they were only just the merchants we saw in the store, these families had wide-ranging businesses that gave them financial advantage that rivaled anything the Copper Kings could have done. But it was never publicly really put together as who are they and how does this all work. So when the fire happened in 1905, the chain of events was that the fire happened. They opened Simons on October the 6th by taking the stock and goods from the Lewis store. They purchased it. They bought another Park Street store, Case, Granville, and Irwin, in the Owsley block. They used those two stores and operated them while the main store was being reconstructed. They had a major salvage sale at 8 West Park Street. They had a major toy sale. They announced their plans to rebuild, and they were up and running within the 2-year mark. You couldn't do that if you didn't have a network working together to make that kind of decision rather quickly. Because we all think about Simons as saying, oh, that building came back because the insurance paid for it. It was far more important than just what the insurance value was. It was the centerpiece of a network of retail operations. So Mr. J.E. Oppenheimer, Joseph Elias, was born in 1865. He died in 1924 in Butte, but he was listed on the 1900 census. He had his own produce business, which is really interesting from this bill to look at this. So he had a produce, and if you notice on here, it also talks about cigars. And so it's important if you're thinking about, fruits and vegetables and dairy and that kind of thing. And then there's information about cigars on it. He also was related to have a clothing business in another area, right? The Excelsior Clothing Company was not here, but it was visible in Montana, and it was a going concern. Another character is an M.G. Kahn. And he, too, had a produce business and cigars. So he was born in 1859 in Pennsylvania. He was a registered Butte voter by 1887. He died in 1940 in San Francisco, California. He had businesses in San Francisco and traveled back and forth from Butte to San Francisco. His father occupation is listed as a butcher on the census. But then he also had, he started a company here called M.G. Kahn & Co. He was in Helena, Virginia City, and Butte selling wholesale produce and fruit at Edwards on Park Avenue. Now there's a connection between Oppenheimer and Kahn. Joe Oppenheimer was a native of Baltimore, and he came to Butte in 1881 from Salt Lake City. They followed the old northern Utah route to the mining camp, and they partnered with M.G. Kahn for a wholesale produce business. This business included the cigars, bringing George L. Simons into the picture. They then established Simons as a business in 1897. So it's not to say that Simons started out with somebody who had never been in business before. This family had been at it. They knew what they were doing with it. M.G. Kahn was a poultry dealer in 1886 in Grand Island, Nebraska. Henry Kahn and Philip Kahn visited Butte in 1888. In 1892, Henry G. Kahn and Company was established in Anaconda. And in 1894, they were in the Washington Market on 53 West Park Street. So now you're beginning to see that there's a whole bunch of businesses sitting out on this Park Street that had been important to this family, anything from the Simons all the way down to the Metals Bank. Some days it felt like a monopoly. So George L. Simons married Jeanette Oppenheimer in 1898. George was born in Watertown, New York in 1800. And he died in Los Angeles December 31st of 1930. But he was known as Baltimore George, and we've seen the ghost signs in town for the Baltimore cigars, and this is coming from George L. Simons. He also owned a Pacific States furniture and bedding company. Mr. and Mrs. Jack Cohen are nephew and niece, and his path across the country was he moved from Virginia City, Nevada, to Salt Lake City, Utah, to Butte, to Los Angeles. So he did a lot of travel. He worked for and with the Stickney Cigar Company of St. Louis that sold Havana Star cigars, and it was built in 1886. They had offices in Kansas City, Denver, and Salt Lake City. Major brands are some brands we see today, which is Smoker's Emporium, Mercantile, and the Orpheum. The territory that they were covering was Colorado, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Montana, and Nevada. So he traveled a lot. There was a company called the Tobacco Leaf. This was the Simons Craftsman Company touring the West in Florida de Baltimore, and the Pacific States Furniture and Bedding. He first visited Virginia City, Nevada in 1921. So this was a going home trip for him, because he is the son of the late Sam Simons, who was the coroner of Story County in the 1860s. So long family history connected to the mining community, connected to the early pioneers. Their sister and brother-in-law were Mr. and Mrs. Sig Schilling, and they also had another sister, Blanche Oppenheimer of New York City. So there were connections to bring them back and forth. Now, I'm trying to do a little bit of time. So here is some of just the scraping of the surface of the people and the families. And the statement that I want to make about all of these families is that the reason for their success was not one rugged individual doing it by themselves. The reason for their success was they built community and family and stabilized a group of people in this community. This is very much the same thing we are doing today. We fight for it. We sit here with the concept of Butte Cares. We are trying to have programs and trying to do things to keep our community. We are keeping our roots alive when we do that. It's absolutely vital that we are doing the things we are doing, and it is part of our culture. So this part, I want to get Brian and Dale possibly to talk about some of what's up on this table, because they are the experts of what these things are. I'm just the one who's providing a little bit of information below it. So would you like to come up? I don't know how to mic you, so I'm going to stand nearby.
No, I'm good. I won't need one.
Well, they're recording, so I'm just going to stand nearby. Okay.
This is a typical men's top hat, and you see a lot of old photos in Butte of like the mine funerals, union funerals. This is made out of beaver fur. They would remove the fur and then turn it into a felt. This is a really nice one. It's got actual wool, gabardine fabric here. It's lined inside with leather. And this probably dates to about World War I because it's stamped inside, made in America expressly for those who want the best. And it says trademark. There was a big backlash or a big surge of patriotism during World War I. So the U.S. as we entered World War I, and of course Butte was so important because the copper, I'm sure a local store probably carried this. There isn't any other marks inside. Often hat or good department stores or men's or women's clothing stores would stamp them inside with a stamp that says, you know, Weinbergs or wines. Weinbergs and wines are two completely different.
Absolutely.
Things. Weinbergs was the women's clothing store, and Wines was the men's store that is still in existence now. Weinbergs was considered, for most people that I have talked to, Butte's most expensive women's store. And you just didn't go into Weinberg, you went in and you sat down and you asked to see a cocktail dress, and they would model it for you. And if you liked it, you tried it on in your size, and they would alter it to fit you. And Elizabeth Haggerty had a hat gallery upstairs. And that current location would have been where the Meadows Bank is on the corner, and it's the building with the little lions on the top. Half of that was Weinberg's to the left, and to the right, it was H.L. Green, or the Silver Grand. It was a dime store. So you had extreme wealth here, and then a dime store, which is sort of typical what you see throughout Butte. You'll have a mansion, a fourplex, a miner's house, a mansion, and that's sort of that idea of what was happening here.
There was a question in the back.
Oh, I just wanted you to hold it up a little.
Oh, okay.
So a little higher.
Yeah, this, and as you leave,
Thank you.
we'll actually put it so you can see Made in America inside. So that's what I would date this to. It's World War I.
Yes.
What would the cost be for that beaver hat?
I think it depends. It's just like anything. You had extreme high value, high dollar items, and then lower end, just have something on your head.
From my newspaper research, I've seen numbers anywhere from $3 or $4 up to $7 to $10. Now understand, that's a lot of money in that point of time because of the fact you needed multiple beaver pelts, up to about 6, so that it wasn't a case of $2.50 made that hat. There was a lot of work that went into forming the felt for that hat.
Yeah, I could do this. Okay,
You might want your sunglasses off.
Oh, I'm sorry. My eyes. Okay, These were kind of known as a married widow hat. They were very popular from about 1900 through, almost World War I. And as you can see there, I mean, I've seen some that are even larger. And so I have one that's a little bit larger than this, but not much.
So how did the hat stay on your head, and what kind of hairstyle did you need?
The hairstyles, they would actually poof up their hair. And we think, oh, those people must have had a lot of hair. Well, they did. But they also had what we called falls, which were in essence, they would take either their own hair and keep it in a you've heard of combings? And they would put that into some kind of a little vessel on their dressing tables. And then they would actually then have that made into either kind of a bump up. We see this a lot now. We think, oh, this is something new. No, this is something that was done historically. And I even have my great-grandmother's fall, and she used that to puff up her hair. It was a braid, and then she'd push her hair up, and then you would put this on top. Let's see. Okay, here. And then you had hat pins. And some of them, I have one that's about that long.
They were so dangerous that cities would ban them
That's
because
right.
men sitting in a streetcar were afraid of getting, it goes through your hat,
Right.
through the hat, through your hair to the other side. And they tried to sort of ban them. And I've had them even bigger. I've had them like 20 inches long.
And the points were sharp
Right.
because you were actually piercing the hat.
Yes, and women, that was their concealed weapon. So,
Yeah, the film Titanic at the beginning, she's wearing a huge hat like that. And you have to remember, we're taller. You know, I'm maybe average size. You know, women were like 5 feet, and they were much tinier. So on a woman of that era, it would even appear even bigger. I mean, they're huge hats. And they were called Merry Widow hats because there was a very popular Broadway show on Broadway called The Merry Widow, and that's where you get the Merry Widow waltz. And they wore them, I guess, in the chorus, and that became what they referred to.
also the dress, the silhouette was these huge hats, and then these dresses that were very, very column-like. And I have a reproduction of that, and if you come on November 8th, I plan on wearing it. And so you can kind of see what that silhouette would have looked like.
On
Question.
November 8th, would you encourage us to wear one of
Please
our
do.
grandmother's old hats?
Please.
Oh, yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, dress the part.
If you wish, like I said, I plan on wearing the silhouette. Okay?
Yeah, this is again fur felt, and they would felt it, and that's where the term mad as a hatter comes from, because they used mercury to do some of this work, and that's just not a made-up term. They figured that hatters went sort of crazy.
Yeah, it was absorbed into their skin, since they really didn't know any better, and since they were working with this, it would absorb, and it affected their...
Mercury poisoning has a mental health effect.
Mercury poisoning.
And that was the era of, they would actually stuff whole birds, taxidermy whole birds, and that's why the carrier pigeon is extinct, because they hunted them and put them on women's hats. You know, they're
And that's where we got the rules about how many you could have to conserve them. It was because the hat industry was using them unbelievably fast. Sort of like the buffalo.
What about the green one, Brian?
This is an unusual early 1930s. In the 20s, women wore cloche hats, and cloche is French for dome, so it sat very tight on your head. And this is one of those sort of, I've been in the business a long time, and I rarely find these. Unfortunately, if you're a woman with a long face, This look really didn't work.
It made you look like a sad cartoon.
Yeah, so it's got these droopy sides, and yeah, it's almost what you could call like a reverse cloche, because the interest is in the back. But yeah, this would sit almost where your eyebrows are, and it's a very droopy look. Early 1930s, when hemlines started to drop, just as the stock market tanked. There's lots. It's very interesting, the dynamic of like copper production and what people were doing, and fashion also reflects that.
And the way fashion worked was because we had our buyers going out, and more often than not, they were out visiting their families and other stores, other family businesses. So they were also ambassadors. So they were saying how good Butte was doing. And you could find some amazing things just over that concept of who they were, what they were doing, and what they were saying about our community. Because that's how they got them back here. They got the information from going to the big cities in Europe and in New York. You have another hat, the miner's hat, or the...
Oh, the hard hat.
Yeah, the miner's hat. Why do we care about miner's hats in this show?
Would you like me to?
Yeah,
Yes!
So I will address that. So this show, as we were talking about at the beginning, we're trying to cover a lot in this one show as our introduction show. And when we were talking, we're trying to show how history and culture and art all tie together. Well, as we all know, Butte is what it is today because of the mining. And so one of the things that hats aren't just fashion. Hats are utilitarian as well. And so we're going to showcase a couple of the hats, mining hats, in the show as well, to show that, the utilitarian side of it. And we'll probably dig deeper in future shows on more of that. But that's why they're here. So the one red hat is actually a current one. You can see where it's falling apart. And then the one over here, carbide, which Jim or Wayne, can you help me with the dates on that? It'd be, yeah.
1900, 1910.
Yeah, exactly.
Right in there.
Because carbide ended around 1917. Around there is when they stopped using it. So that's where that hat would have come from. And of course they used candlelight before. But this is the progression of a mining cap, which actually will tie into military caps, as we have some research, and you'll see that.
Yes.
Not only is there a show November 8th, there's an exhibit at the Phoenix Gallery the whole month, most of the month of November. So if you miss the show, because you're out of town, because I don't see why else you would miss the show, you can come see the exhibit and see a lot of it as well.
Where is the address for that show?
It is in the Phoenix Block Building, the foreground gallery next to the Orofino.
Corner of Park in Wyoming.
Simon's store, where it belongs.
And then that also brings us to the hat that is being shown over here. We said art. We're encouraging people to make a hat, whether it's a crocheted hat, as we're demonstrating here. This is our sample of a beer can hat that we did at the Butte Brew Fest.
It's really a derby,
Yeah, it is.
because the derby's important.
Exactly. Or if you wanted to do a mock-up of a vintage hat, or if you wanted to do a futuristic hat. We're going to try to display about 30 of our hats, historic hats, and then we want 30 artistic hats from the community. Or if you have a hat on your shelf that you'd like to try to enter into the show, please reach out to us and we can discuss that as well. But we want to see your creative side, because that brings it all together.
So we have another hat that's black in the center here.
Yeah, this is a men's hat. They were often referred to as Trilby. Trilby was a character in a novel. And it's not a cowboy hat, it's just a broad-brimmed men's hat. And if you walk on Park Street in the old, where Walker's Bar was, they've got that huge photo of when beer was reintroduced in 1933. Everybody's wearing a hat. If you look at the picture, you have people in Walker's, almost everybody's wearing a hat or a cap, and even the women, there's a few women standing on the street as they're unloading those casks of beer. You know, you basically didn't leave the house without a hat. Also for, it's cold, in the winter, it's cold. And then we've got the high school and grade school little felt beanie caps. We're researching whether people just wore them for homecoming or...
You have an answer.
I have one answer. So when I was digging out the Grant school hat from our schoolhouse today, sitting on our wall is a picture of their individual class pictures with each of them wearing that hat.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
So it's your class hat.
Was it
Eighth graders?
When you were in 8th grade.
Okay, good.
8th grade you wore.
We have a Butte High one, though.
Yeah, we have
That'll
a
be fine. I'll bring that one around too.
Girls Central. And what's great about Butte being such a large cosmopolitan city, when you bought a hat, they put it in a box. And these are the Elizabeth Haggerty ones that have the daisies, and it says Elizabeth Haggerty, Butte, Montana. And then there's the real Razoo sort of zebra tiger stripe that say Elizabeth Haggerty, Butte, Montana. Some of them are marked Weinberg's. But yeah, Weinberg's, from what I was told, was Butte's most expensive ladies store. Where Callie's Corner is, that was Boynton's, which was another woman's dress shop. Mostly for matrons. Stores were very much, sort of like today, geared towards your age. There was Weinberg's, and then Boynton's was for the older gals, and then Moran's. There was Ed Moran's on Park Street, which is where the public defender's office is now. That's where they were. And then the brother, Emo Moran's, is on North Main, right behind the liquor store. That was like the juniors. If you were a younger woman, you shopped at Emo's. Probably your mother shopped at Emo Moran's, and your mother probably shopped at Ed Moran's.
Question.
Yes, was that a millinery store, Mrs. Keyhole, right next to Callie's Corner?
Yeah, there's the big sign on
The keyhole, yeah, that's one of our ghost signs in town. So I need, in some of our time, I want to do questions too, but I also need to say that another component of what we are doing is studio research. So it's not just me going through the books, and it's not just going through the collections. We're providing the opportunity of getting a millinery workshop back into this community so that we can keep these traditions alive. This hat is actually made from my research of some of the things that Butte ordered. One of the things I noticed was a shipment of 1,200 rolls of crepe paper from the Denison Paper Company. And it turns out that in 1901 through 1908 was the high point of making these kinds of crepe paper hats. So they actually published patterns that you could get for 5 or 10 cents at the store, and they advertised for 15 cents you could create a hat. So what I did is Brian had lent me one of the hats from the historic collection, and my job was to look at that hat, figure out how it was made, and then do what they were doing from the Denison Paper Company and turning a frame and a crown into a hat. So this is a work in progress. It's wearable. By the way, Denison's crepe paper was fireproof. And another way that Butte used it was in our very first parades. Did you know that 150 years ago, the first parade was for the centennial in this community? And Butte, from the day one when they planned that parade, wanted it to be the best show in the entire Northwest. How far have we moved from our roots? We still believe that. So this one was the crepe paper hat. This one was a standard felt hat where I wove the ribbon and I made felt flowers for it. You could see this hat in part of the Visions and Voices show that's currently up in the foreground gallery. This is the hat for the little duck. And then These were the beer can hats. So Butte Brewing is one of our sponsors, and so yes, we did make up a good old-fashioned 80s style beer can hat. And then this is a fedora that I made from a coat from Goodwill. So part of what I'm supporting is the idea that it doesn't cost a lot to make a hat, and if you don't know how to make it, we've been offering workshops, and on Tuesday nights, you can come in and do a hat workshop with me, and I can help support you either in materials or concepts or techniques that you need to freshen up your hat or redecorate it. So we're saying that we want to have the community come, participate, and play with us. Enjoy our culture. It's, in many communities, you wouldn't be able to say this is intrinsic to our culture, but this really is. This is part of where we were founded. This is who we are. It explains why we have parades. It explains why we go out and have festivals. We haven't run far away. So I have a little time for questions. Anybody else have questions at this point? Because you got a whole array of people who could answer them here.